Hey guys, so we're going to be using Adobe Illustrator to create our at least one of our Snapchat geofilters, and I'm just showing you kind of a quick, simple way of creating a Snapchat geofilter partially based on your own hand-drawn illustrations. So basically, first you have to start off with your illustration. This is Saddle Butte. It's pretty rudimentary, but I did it in Sharpie on a piece of paper, and I did do some other illustrations that I ended up scanning in. Actually, I didn't really scan it. I just took a picture with my phone in decent lighting. Actually, I even used Photo Booth. We'll see how these look. So I'll show you what I would do. I'm going to go into Photoshop and do File Open and find those photos I took of my two hand-drawn illustrations that I'm going to use for my geofilter. So I'm opening both of those. I believe they're PNG files at the moment. So they're still in color and everything. I'm going to do Image Mode Grayscale in Photoshop. Image Top Menu Mode Grayscale. That's going to remove the color information. And then if I do Command L or Control if you're on a PC, I'm going to bring the whites up and make the darks a lot darker on this. Okay, and then I'm going to crop it next with the crop tool. Just click on that and drag in the sides using these white areas here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I do have some areas of shadow that might be concerning, but what we end up doing is we end up editing these in Photoshop to get them looking their best, and then we bring them into Illustrator and work with them in Illustrator. And I'm actually going to do an image trace. I think I did go over this with some of you in 231, Graphic Design 231, but if you haven't taken that class, I'll walk you through it in class today. So save as. I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now. I mean, you could put it in a document folder under, let's see, Electronic Design 1 and Geofilter, and I could just make this, which one is this? Prickly Pear, Cactus, name it. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other file, basically, Image Mode Grayscale, discard the color information. I'm already on the crop tool, so I'm just going to go ahead and crop this. My finger's in there, which is kind of problematic, but push return to make it stick. I'm going to crop it a little bit more than that. And then Command L to bring up the whites. I'm going to bring it up quite a bit on this one. And you bring the black slider over to bring up the blacks. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. I'm going to push return. Clone stamp. I'm going to do an option to sample from this area. I'm going to sample that white over the top of my finger to get rid of that. So I'll do a Command S. Actually, let's do File Save As. And we'll put it in that same folder in our documents. And I'm going to name this one Saddle Butte. So that's how I got my images ready from the drawing that I did. And then next I'll go over in Illustrator how you would trace these. So let's do File, New, in Illustrator. Okay, I switched over to Illustrator, File, New, Document. So go to Print just to make sure these are going to be in high resolution. I'm going to change this over to inches because that's better. For some reason this isn't showing up in inches, but that's fine. 8.5 by 11. CMYK color, raster effects went on 300. So let's create that. We don't need a bleed or anything on our document for this. We're basically just going to be using this to trace our illustrations that we just made. So File, Place to bring those in to Illustrator. I'm going to go back into my folder here. Let's do the prickly pear first. Place that in. You can also click and drag to place it at a certain size. So if you do File, Place, prickly pear, Place, instead of clicking one time, you can click and drag it to make it the size you want it, which is actually kind of nice. So this might be a little bit of an issue. So if we go to Window, Image Trace, we can bring up the Image Trace panel. We can put on the preview, and we can try and get this looking a little bit better. So if I turned my threshold up to 210, that seemed to have helped. Some of it's just going in here and changing a few things. And just moving these sliders around, and if you have preview checked, then you can see how it's looking. This actually looks pretty good to me, so I'm just going to say expand, because that's the second part of the process. Once you get it looking the way you want it to with this image trace panel that we pulled up, you can push expand. And let's go a little closer. We can see now that I pushed expand, you can see that this is all vector now. It's no longer a pixel-based image, it's vector. So you can see all of the vector things. So it did bring in a white background. You can't tell because it's a white artboard, but if we move this file over, you can really see there is a white background. If we use the white arrow tool instead of the black, click on that and push delete, you can see that that helped get rid of that background, because I don't actually want that background in there for my finished drawing. If I do a Command plus, I can zoom in. I'll actually X out of this image trace panel. And I can use my white arrow tool to select different shapes and change the colors there. So maybe I want the insides of these flower shapes to be, I don't know, like a pink color or something. I think I'm probably just going to use flat color for this too, for the most part. So I'll start messing around with the colors and I'll get them filled in. Oh, it's doing this thing where it's in grayscale, so because we brought it in. So we'll need to go into color up here, and let's just grab all of this and grab all of this and go to CMYK color. And hopefully that will, change it for us. So we might have to do that to get this to work properly. But I'll select these shapes. I'm pushing Shift down on my keyboard to get multiple shapes selected. I have a little problem with a line going through certain parts of my graphic that I don't really want. I can use the eyedropper tool to sample the color from other shapes as well. So you have to have your shape selected to be able to sample it, but you can use that eyedropper tool. It works really well. And then let's use the white arrow tool to select the inside of the cactus. We'll get a good green color going. Maybe like an appley green. Oh, I'm getting that again. If you get that, just go to CMYK. I think one way around that would be to save this out as a CMYK file before we export it. But I think I actually am liking this pretty well. I think that looks pretty good. I mean, I don't love these. So one thing we could do is we could maybe just get the white arrow tool, push Shift, and open up this path here and these anchor points by pushing Shift and clicking on them. They'll turn white when they're open, and that means you can kind of click and drag them around. So I'm going to just kind of click and drag these around. I think I have two. There, for some reason, there's two of them in there. It's hard to find the right one, but I can kind of do this. And so now I have these two shapes. If I want to use the Pathfinder tool, I can go to Window, Pathfinder, and the Pathfinder is really handy for bringing two shapes together. Unite is the one I want to use here. If you hover over these in the Pathfinder panel, they tell you what they do. And basically this is a way of working with shapes to either cut out shapes from other shapes or add shapes together. So I'm going to add these two shapes that were separate as one piece. I'm going to make them unite. So push the Unite button, and now it's one chunk basically that we're working with. And I could do that to all of these to get rid of that line that's going down the middle of them. Let's see if I made any mistakes. Okay. I'm just pushing Command Z a few times just to see if I accidentally deleted anything I didn't mean to. But yeah, that's one way of getting rid of those lines in the prickly pear, which I think I'll go ahead and do, and then I'll show you the rest of the steps here. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that. I've gotten rid of the lines by using the Pathfinder tool and just bringing those two shapes closer together and then uniting them. Okay, so now we can use the black arrow tool to move this. We don't want to use the white arrow tool to move it because it'll only move. The white arrow tool is really good at selecting certain little shapes and it'll move them separate from the other shapes. But if you use the black arrow, it can actually get all of the shapes at one time. So we'll just do this. Let's put it on the actual white background now. I had it on the darker background. Sometimes it helps to move it into the darker background just to see if there's any white in it. It just helps a little bit with that. I might go ahead and delete this little area here. I can use the eraser tool to do that. I can also use the eraser tool to maybe delete, actually I don't think that'll work very well because these are actually filled in with white. So I can just bring these paths down and join them together like I did the other ones. Oops. Sometimes there's a couple different shapes stacked underneath too that you don't realize are there until you start moving things around. Like I'm realizing that there's quite a few little shapes underneath of different shapes all layered on top of each other, which is okay. It's just okay. So there we go. Now that I have that, I can bring in the, let's export this out. It's a little bit, the canvas size is too big, but we can always just do File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards. You can also do this in the Properties panel. Just do Edit Artboard here. And then let's just make it smaller. We can just grab it. And oops, I need to, here, I meant to grab it from here. I gotta move this over. I got too many things open. Okay. And that. And that. So this is a really quick way of creating an illustration in Adobe Illustrator. I pushed Enter on my keyboard to bring it down to the correct size, and then I can exit it. So using the Properties panel. So that's this is my illustration that I've created. I'm going to save it as a prickly pear. Save. Now this isn't the actual Snapchat geofilter, but it's you know, going to work in my geofilter project. So save as, let's make it a PNG file. Actually, let's do a file export to get the PNG. Export as, and PNG. We want to click on use artboards so we don't end up exporting. I'm just going to do it at high resolution for now. Transparent background, okay. So we want to use artboards because if we have anything outside of the artboard in this gray area, that will export into the file too. And usually the stuff that's in the gray area around the artboard is stuff that you don't want included in your file. So yeah, I have this looking pretty good. So I could actually, let's go ahead and file, let's make another artboard. Let's add a second one. And I can make it bigger if I need to, which I'm going to, because I'm going to bring in the saddle view picture. So File, Place. Here it is. It's the one I edited in Photoshop. Actually, I shouldn't click it in. I think I'm just going to click in. Oops. Exit out of here. File, Place, Saddle View, Place. Click and drag it in.